It's really just about you. It is the fundamental knowledge of all knowledges. And it's for everyone, everywhere, all the time, because you take the whole thing, it's really just about one person. Whoever the reader is, all these different characters and things, it's just about you.
This message needed to be said. It needs to be said that the parts of us need to relate in a certain way to each other. And how is it going to explain that in a way that we understand?
It's there and it's rational.
But it's deeply hidden. Just the problem of evil has taxed people for thousands of years. So we can deal with that as point number two.
We'll get out of here in time for lunch. Hey everybody, welcome back to Swedenborg in Life. My name is Curtis and I'm your host, Dr. Jonathan Rose. Thank you for coming back.
So nice to be here.
I feel fully unworthy to be in your presence, which is nice. It puts me on, it gives me that edge, that mental edge. I'm glad you're here because I'm hoping you can help me with a problem that I have. So let me set this up a little bit for you.
Okay. All right.
So picture the world thousands of years ago,
okay.
4,000 or 5,000 years ago. I don't know exactly how long ago. People are living in the world and they're being bad. They're not being good. They're doing all the things to each other that you're not supposed to do to each other. They're not being good people. And it's a mess and people are suffering and we want it. We don't want it to happen. But there's really good news because you know who's going to come and talk to everybody? God.
Oh.
God is going to, so I'm talking about when the Bible happened.
Okay.
God is going to come through the Bible and he's going to tell everybody, you know what? You shouldn't live like that. This is how you should live.
Straighten us all out.
Straighten us, because it's God who is the good guy in the story and is morality and truth and love and all that. So he comes in and he's like, you know what? Don't murder. Don't commit adultery. Don't steal. All these things people are doing, God is saying, don't do that.
If anybody's going to know what the rules are, God set the rules.
Get
knows
in there.
The rules.
Stand up for all of us.
Yeah. Okay,
so he's doing that. He's knocking them all down. The world is getting better and better, right? Because that's why God would come in and do it. So he's got all those, and then he's gonna finally confront the people that are holding slaves. You know,
they did that back then.
Oh, they did it. It was terrible. I mean, look, there's not that much worse stuff you can do than make somebody have to do whatever you say for their entire live the life you want them to live instead of your own life. So God is showing up and he's talking to those people. And so I'm just excited to read. He's just going to lay into them.
Good.
And so this is what God said. This is out of Leviticus 25. In the Bible, God's talking to the human race. He says, as for the male and female slaves whom you may have, let them go. I mean, I didn't read that last part from the Bible, but that's what he's going to say.
It's got to be what's coming.
He's going to say, how dare you ever think you could have somebody else as your property, that everyone is my child, everyone deserves to live. That's what, So let me just finish out this verse. Okay, as for the male and female slaves whom you may have, it is from the nations around you that you may acquire male and female slaves.
May acquire?
It's like, it gets worse. It gets worse. You may also acquire them from among the aliens residing with you and from their families who are with you who have been born into your land. They may be your property.
Wow.
You may keep them as a possession for your children after you, for them to inherit as property.
Wow. It couldn't be clearer. Inherited property.
This is the problem I need you to help me out with. Like, that is a total mess. Because not only does God not say, stop this slavery, just like I told you to stop some other things, but he tells you how to do it and kind of makes it worse. Like, I'm going to say it's clear that even after you die, they're not free. Your kids can have these people as their slaves.
Yeah, and what strikes me about that in Leviticus, which is just the third book of the Bible, right?
Yeah.
What we've had before that is Genesis and Exodus. And Exodus is a massive story of how people overcame slavery, right?
The Egyptians.
Isn't it like a huge story about the whole children of Israel were enslaved and it was getting worse and worse and worse. And God inspired Moses and he said, let my people go. And all this drama happened, all the plagues and so on. And they got out and they escaped. And then after that, they were given all these laws, including this one. These are escaped people. People who hated slavery, and now they're free, and they're told, but if you want to enslave other people. Just don't pick people from your own tribe. Don't, not us. Get other people, but that's fine. You may do that.
The golden rule. Isn't there this thing called the golden rule?
Right.
Which I heard my daughter learned it when she was little, and she thought it was do to everyone else what they do to you. But that's not what it is.
No, it's not exactly right. It's close. It's close.
And this could be sort of the injunction or imperative of religion is don't do to other people what you wouldn't want them to do to you. But here you have God is telling people do exactly what you didn't want people to do to you to other people. It's a mess. It's a total mess. So this,
especially when you consider that with all these people who they don't know how to do a society, they've been enslaved for hundreds of years, and so now here come these rules from God. It was a perfect situation to set the record straight and say, hey, get rid of slavery. You hated it. Everybody hates it. Don't do it.
So why
is baffling.
Why didn't he? That's what we're going to sort out today. So this is a conversation that's at the forefront of people's minds across the internet. We're going to be looking at some clips from there was a debate between Alex O'Connor and Ben Shapiro, a portion of which focused on this. But this is also just what always comes up if there's going to be a debate between like a Christian or a religious person and an atheist. And the atheist will say, well, what about how there's slavery in the Bible? A lot of people will come across these verses and feel like, well, those were people. God's just trampling on them to get, for some reason, this just seems like my team against your team. It doesn't seem like it's morality at all. So they did that video, Ben Shapiro and Alex O'Connor. I tried to do a reaction video to that before on my Reacts channel. It was just a mess. Like I felt like I can't unpack this conversation at all, but I think we can. And I think that the headline is, I think we can now. I think we're older and stronger and wiser.
Okay.
And I got you backing me up. The headline is, there is an answer. There is an answer. I'm not, that passage in there, I don't feel like is a deal breaker. I don't think it is actually advocating for cruelty. I don't think that it's a sign that the Bible is a worthless, human-written, ego-filled document. But to get there, it's going to take some work. So you want to work hard at this for a second?
Sure. And what's on my mind right now is just how much slavery leads to other things. Like it seems like the kind of thing that Swedenborg would call an evil, and it has falsities that go with it. In other words, that often to support a system like that, you have to consider those people as other, subhuman often, like they don't have feelings or what, and that's why it's okay to do this. They're like farm animals or something. And
that's what it's saying. It's kind of what it's saying here, which is, let's just get those other people and make them our slaves. Don't have it be the ones who are like you. But that is the definition of what hell is, according to Swedenborg, is hell is a love for yourself, which could include a love for your own group. And me and my people are above everyone else. That's hell.
Right.
The bullseye definition of hell.
Despising and mistreating others in comparison with yourself.
But heaven is when you wish the welfare of all.
Yeah.
Above the welfare of yourself.
Everyone who is the neighbor who is to be loved and things like that.
So I think we can get in there. The way that we can get through this conversation and show that this is not saying what it seems to be saying on the surface, and that it actually is part of a dispensation from God that aims to bring everyone into happiness and freedom. That is what heaven is. We got to talk about four things. We need to unpack, and these will be the four sections of our conversation here today. Okay. First, Scripture and the nature of Scripture. What the heck is this thing that we're talking about? These texts
seems like an important
that are here.
Consideration.
What is this, and what was it trying to do? Second part is evil. Talk about I don't know if it's quite the problem of evil, but how does God deal with evil?
Yeah, right.
Third, the details. The details in Scripture. Why are there, even in this passage, why are there all these weird specifics about how to do things?
The Bible specializes in weird specifics.
And why?
They're everywhere.
And why? Because you just think, you back up 1,000 yards and you just, the Bible is God's word to the human race. Great. It's about sort of morality and that thing. But when you zoom in close, it's a bunch of weird details. That's what like 70% of the text is.
Yes. Right.
So why are those there? And then finally, we want to talk about the value. What if this passage is in the Word of God, what's it doing for us?
What possible good could it do?
Is there actually within there something that's valuable?
Okay, well, that sounds easy.
Yep. You're right. It's gonna be nothing at all.
So just the problem of evil has taxed people for thousands of years. So we can deal with that as point number 2.
We'll get out of here in time for lunch.
Yeah, right.
All right. So I want to start. Let's watch this clip from this video because I feel like
great.
it's sort of the state of the conversation around this.
All right.
Here we go.
Good.
Oh, and we'll do this dealing first with the nature of Scripture.
But don't you think that this problem could have been solved a lot more easily if there had been a stronger religious tradition of opposition to the ownership of other human beings? Why can't that have been the case?
Okay,
because
so
Scripture quite explicitly condones it.
Right,
and in fact gives you the details of how to do
Yes,
it.
so-
That's something that couldn't have been done, in other words.
why didn't the Bible prescribe the perfect world as I would see it, or as you might see it? And the answer is because two reasons. One, as stated right up top, I'm not God. I assume he has different logic than I do. Two, the Bible is in an inherently problematic position in the sense that, on the one hand, it's trying to divulge important truths for all time. At the same time, it's talking to a people of a particular time. If you believe, as I do, in a God who spoke to human beings in some form or fashion and has to speak to them on a level that they can understand, in ways they can understand, then that immediately is going to discount the ability to do a lot of very radical things that would have appeared radical in 1200 BC.
I feel like they hit the main points. Alex O'Connor is talking about the Bible could have done some good here. Why didn't it do any good? And then Ben Shapiro is talking about why didn't, and I think he phrased it well, why didn't the Bible prescribe the world that you'd want to see?
The perfect world, yeah. I thought he made some great points in there, too, about how, assuming that the logic of the divine, which is something the Bible even says, your thoughts are not my thoughts, neither my ways, your ways. That the divine's on a different level, so if we don't understand, it's like, well, yeah, that's partly because it's a divine document.
But I think we can, so what we want to try to do now is understand.
Okay.
So Emanuel Swedenborg comes on the scene, and I think if you want to say the emblem that you would embroider on his body of theology is you can understand these things.
You can, yes. There is a rational explanation for why the text is the way that it is.
Yes, there is a logic to it, and the logic is essentially correspondences.
Mm-hmm.
So, why doesn't the Old Testament prescribe the kind of world that you would want to have? Is because that's not what it was there to do.
Right, and it's absolutely true that the stories are laid out in a way, and Swedenborg talks a lot about the fact that it's accommodated to people of all different times and different levels of education or life experience or whatever. A lot of it, you think of Jesus' teaching in the New Testament, it's about grapes and sheep and things that people have experience with and will understand.
Yeah.
But the element that Correspondences brings in is that it's couched in those terms, but what it's really saying is not that. This is not really about one person owning another person. That's sort of at the heart of Swedenborg's explanation. Slavery does not mean slavery.
If I had to describe the big story of what the Bible is, and the Old Testament in particular, it's like a seed. So you had, back at a certain time in history, there was a group of people who were living somewhere, and God said these things to them, and it was this strange little shell of a seed. It was just a little bit of the human race was following these things, and they were strange and rough, but the point of the Old Testament is to be a seed for a little while. These people were carrying it around and doing it, but within it, just like there is within a seed, is this huge tree that wants to grow out. That's the internal sense. That's the actual meaning, the heavenly meaning captured within these symbols. And
part of the nature of the heavenly meaning is that it applies to all people at all times. There's an essentially one-size-fits-all nature to the inner meaning because it transcends time and space and so on. So it's not about, you can enslave that person, but not that person, which sounds so offensive. now. It's like, oh, well, we're the good people now. We used to be slaves ourselves, but now we're the good people and we'll enslave these other people.
Whenever I try to explain this, what we're doing right now, Correspondences, in my mind, or when I'm reading Swedenborg, I think this is so good. This is just self-evident. But as soon as we start to talk about it, I'm thinking about the people at home and that they're saying, what are these guys talking about? So let me try to, I'm going to address this camera and try to give the 6-year-old version of this.
Great.
Tell me if this is right.
Okay.
The Old Testament is like a seed. A seed is something that inside there's the genetic material that's going to lead to this amazing tree. But there's also a casing around it that doesn't have any DNA. It's not even really alive, but you have to have that in order for it to survive the journey and sprout and grow. So
yes, even across hundreds of years, like it's an interesting analogy because they have seeds from thousands of years ago.
In Norway,
and some of them will still work. Like you plant them and they'll grow.
Yeah.
They were able to hold on for that long.
In the Doomsday Vault in the Norwegian mountains somewhere.
Yes, right.
Let's go get some of
heirloom
those,
species.
It's probably delicious.
Yeah.
So you have this seed, and the seed is Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Genesis, those books, those stories, Moses, Noah, all that. That's the shell. And inside of it is love your neighbor as yourself and everything that's good.
Spiritual DNA.
And
something living, something that can produce life in us, something that can reform the human race, even though you wouldn't think a statement about slavery would have any salutary effect on the human race.
And the reason,
especially one that says, go ahead,
I know. If I was telling this to a 6-year-old, they would already be playing with something else. I feel like I'm losing them.
Okay.
But so listen, you little kid. So Noah and all that stuff and this and Exodus and all that, that's the case. And it holds within it this stuff that's really good and really beautiful and really divine and everything you would think would be what God would tell the human race. And the way that it holds it in there is that everything stands for something. So even slavery stands for something that's different than what it is. All the stories and boats and food and everything you meant, that all stands for something spiritual. And so you can have people possessing this outer meaning that holds within it the inner. Okay, goodbye.
Yeah, that's
left.
good.
He left.
That's good.
He's crying.
Well, then I can talk to some of the older folks and just say, part of the idea of this is not that the symbolism, it's symbolic. Correspondences are basically a system of symbolism, but it's a system. So it's not just arbitrary that one thing just happens to mean this, but you'd have to just know that because you read Swedenborg or something. No, it's a pretty consistent language across all the different authors of the Old and New Testaments, which were written by people across hundreds, even thousands of years, and yet the idea is that the moon has a certain meaning all across there, and mountains have a certain meaning, all figs and so on. And so it's a system. It's not just arbitrary symbolism, like saying, well, let's say that this salt shaker means Europe and this, pepper shaker
because Europe is States. Pretty salty.
Yeah,
overall,
that's right.
about a lot of stuff.
And America's more peppery.
We're just peppery people. It's double not arbitrary. It's not arbitrary in that way, and that there is a consistent meaning that applies across it. But it's also not arbitrary in that the symbolism is literally a part of the physics of the reality. I mean, like the physics that cross between the physical and the spiritual world. Because, for example, light in the Bible is a correspondence for the truth. There's all different ways in which whenever there's light mentioned in the Bible, it corresponds to truth. Well, that correspondence extends to just regular life. What the light in this room is doing for us right now, allowing us to understand what's going on here and affecting how everybody at home sees us or, understands us. That is literally the role that truth plays in the world of the spirit. So it's not just these things can stand in for each other, but they do the same role in their respect. It's written into everything. You couldn't just switch the Bible around and say, well, let's rewrite it and have a mountain stand for something else. And it's got to be the symbolism that it is is so real that it used to be you could just look out at nature and learn the same things, because there as well you have mountains and you have the moon and you have all these things.
True.
It's a part of how everything really actually works.
And you're reminding me of something that a thought that came to me when I was doing a Bible study a few years ago, that what the Bible says is literally true of the spiritual world.
6-year-old.
In other words, that when in one Bible study we looked at what clouds are doing. Clouds behave very much not like physical clouds in the sky here in the Bible, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
But what they're doing, because of what they mean, you can see that it's non-literal. If you look at it, a pillar of cloud led the Israelites around. When has there ever been such a thing? There's no such thing.
Coming in the clouds
reality
of heaven. It's
right.
Just like if you go through a cloud in an airplane and it's just foggy for a while, then you pop out.
Right. And there's no way that someone who was coming in the clouds would be seen by people all over the planet at the same time, even though that's what the prophecy says. But there are some parts of the world that aren't cloudy, and some parts of the world are dark.
We're going to have to set up some mirrors so that everyone can see.
Everyone can see it. Yeah. It's literally true of the spiritual world, which I think is an interesting way to think about it.
So you have this book, including this part in Leviticus, which we're going to get deeply into in a little bit. It is a seed that is holding this spiritual meaning and doing so through correspondences or symbolism. If you step back and look at what is God trying to do with the Bible, what is this thing actually? Because Ben Shapiro in that clip said, he was speaking to a specific people at a specific time. Why was he doing that? Why was he talking to those people? Why those people in particular? Why was he trying to what instructions was he trying to give them? That was to create the seed. But if you look at what the tree is that he knew in providence, now it's everybody's got access to it. Now it's affecting the whole world. It's got the New Testament and Jesus Christ in there. And so now everybody, if you look at that, here's what Swedenborg says the whole Bible actually is. It appears on its surface to be a chronology of a certain people at a certain time in the world with perplexing details
and the
everywhere.
odd things that happen.
This is what it's actually about. You ready? This is from Secrets of Heaven 5354. The process of regeneration, which contains much that cannot be described, constitutes the bulk of angelic wisdom and is such that no angel working to eternity can fully exhaust the subject. What's regeneration?
That's pretty deep. So regeneration is, in other words, what people sometimes mean by being reborn or rebirth. It's the idea that you can actually become, in a sense, a different person, or you can be born anew, the way it puts it in the New Testament. It's a method of change to where you don't, you love better things than you used to, you have better thoughts than you used to, your mind and your heart are changed. And it's a gradual process that takes a lot of time. But that's what the book is really all about, which is something that concerns all human beings, at least the ones that want to change. It's a recipe for how to change.
So, as you just alluded to, the quote goes on to say, so it says there's this amazing amount of stuff in regeneration. It's this mystical process of turning into a good person. That is why it is the main subject of the word's inner meaning.
That's the main topic.
So the Bible is a seed. The outer shell is all these stories and it's Leviticus and all that. But inside, there is this spirit to it. And the main subject is, here's how you leave the hell of ego and materialism and dominion and everything you're trying to do bad to your neighbors and come into the heaven of regeneration and goodness and truth.
And being a loving, wise person.
That is what you'd think God is trying to do.
And interestingly, your analogy of a seed is actually in the Bible. It's in the New Testament. It's in the Old Testament.
No, I made that up.
In the New Testament, it says a sower went forth to sow, and he sowed seed. And then when Jesus explains this to the disciples, he says, that's the word. that's what gets sown, and these are these different reactions that it has. So that's right in there. And I'm also thinking of Isaiah 55, beautiful passage that I can't quote from memory, where it says that my word, God says, my word goes forth. It's like rain and snow that falls down. And the phrase that's come to mind is that to give seed to the sower and bread to the eater. It says that's what it won't return to me void. It'll accomplish what I set it out to do. So it's almost, your analogy of DNA is good, because it's almost like, in our modern computer way of thinking of things, you'd say it's software or something that there's something being installed that's going to do something. The words on the page are only that first little rain, but it's there to give a seed to the sower and bread to the eater.
I love that. I would say just for procedure, if you ever don't know a quote directly, you can just say you do and just say something to me, and I'm not going to know. I'm just going to, wow.
That makes you a pleasure to be
Here's Isaiah 50. Oh, really? That's what it is? But also, we just proved our point. You said, I didn't even think of those passages when I thought of the idea of the word is like a seed. And also, when you said those, it called to mind for me, kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which is real little.
That's right.
And then it grows into a big tree.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
That is what we're talking about. The correspondences literally are what they symbolize. So the word literally is a seed in that this text does inside you what seeds do in the ground in this world. It's not just Jesus is looking around the room and like what should I tell these people the kingdom of heaven is like? It's a little bit like a book. It's a little bit like a cup. A seed. It's probably that is it's the instance, physical instance of the analog to the spiritual thing, which is called the word.
And the parable of the sower is so beautiful in that regard, because it shows you that for some people, the content in there will just bounce off them like off a hard path, or nothing happens. It doesn't grow, it doesn't germinate. And there's other people who have a mind that's more receptive, but it's full of weeds. And, in other words, there's different stages. And then you get to the fourth one, and it's good ground, where it brings forth, where that ground is really receptive to it. So it's not that this automatically happens in everybody, all that, just being exposed to one Bible verse will,
That'd be nice.
Yeah, that would be good. But some of it bounces off. And so even the text itself is kind of putting it back on us to say, are you receptive to this message that I've got in there? Because this doesn't want to sit there as a seed. What's that other passage about the seed that says if it falls into the earth, in other words, if it remains alone, but if it gets buried, it leads to many, many good things.
That's right. I think you saying that makes me realize anybody who sees this passage in the Word about the slavery and says, I don't like that, so I don't like the Bible, I don't blame you.
Not about.
I think without Swedenborg giving this explanation of the correspondences and what that all means, I don't know where I would be with the Bible. I would probably say you just can't reconcile that with love and goodness. It's got to be, it's either it's not real or God's not real or so.
At the best, it's baffling and it's often infuriating.
So I think that the one thing we have to explain is that the shell of the seed is not the plant that it's going to grow into. That was never meant to be anything other than a way to get the tree to start. There's that in that video that we showed, one of the top comments in it, which I love. I'll read it to you. It says, if God can tell this people not to eat shellfish, then he can tell people to not own slaves. Because and we'll get to this in the next.
He's got it in him, yeah.
He could do that. So something different was happening there. It wasn't just God's taking a shot at how can I get the kind of society that I want to have happen. This was not God's ideal part of it. Even it says, Swedenborg says, even the people, I think we'll get to this in the quotes, even the people dealt with in the Bible, these are not like the best people in the world. These are all warlike, nasty people in a nasty part of the world. This is actually God doing this almost like triage on keeping heaven and earth together for a little while until his master plan of first coming in person as Jesus Christ, but then finally opening up the inner meaning to people where there is bare morality, and it does instruct on how to live a good, true, noble life, which is, by the way, what a lot of people pull out of the Bible anyway. That's what he was trying to do.
Yeah, that's true. It's amazing how many people do get the sense that it's about being a good person. I can't quite tell you how, or I don't know quite how that passage about the slavery does it, but that's the message of it.
Well, that's exactly why, like in the clip, Alex can try to pin Ben down and say, "You don't think it's good to have slaves, do you?
Yes, that's right.
Look at your holy book is saying that, and that's against what you believe, even though you say you get your beliefs from that."
Right.
Okay, let's do a few more Swedenborg quotes, because what he'll do is break down this. He'll open the conversation in a way that I don't know how to. So, and this is Swedenborg in Secrets of Heaven 8974, where he's addressing, I don't know if it's this exact commands about slaves and having slaves in the Bible. So he says, since the next parts of the text are about male and female slaves from among the children of Israel, I think this is about this exact verse, I need to say what these passages hold in their inner meaning. Anyone can see they contain secrets of heaven, meaning there's something deeper than what's on the surface, because they are the words and commands of Jehovah delivered in person to Moses on Mount Sinai, and because they come directly after the statements of the Decalogue, or Ten Commandments. Without such secrets, the text would be nothing more than a collection of civil and criminal laws like those of other nations on earth.
It's that is such a great point, that surely God didn't bow the heavens and come down to tell you, oh yes, there's a curfew on the streets of this neighborhood at 9 o'clock at night.
And as people are complaining, it doesn't even make things better. It's not like a kinder version of slaveholding, and it's not abolishing slavery. It's just like, this is what God is coming to do. Criminal laws like those of other nations on earth, devoid of any hidden inner message from heaven. Because it doesn't. What's the goodness? Why does it matter that God said this?
Yeah.
How does that make anything better for anyone? You only had a few words to say when you were here, God. Yeah, I think you wasted some on this. The secrets it contains, though, are invisible except to angels in the heavens. So without the inner meaning, we cannot see them. The inner meaning teaches us how angels perceive the word. So it teaches us the secrets that lie within the word.
One of Swedenborg's mind-boggling ideas, and he's got a lot of them, but to me, I just wouldn't think that
the
they would...
Swedenbogler. Sorry. It took me a long time to think of, like, what's a cool name for him based on what you just said.
That's good.
The Swedenbogler.
I like that. You heard it here first.
Okay, sorry. I feel like I just ruined a Picasso. Like, you're on this great thought, and... okay.
The idea that angels have books and read books, and that they have the Bible and they read the Bible, like... Who says that? You know, that's a mind blower.
And that angels, as you mentioned last episode, they're people like us who have died, who are in the afterlife, and that the Bible, one of the things it does is keeps heaven and earth connected, because while we read our little shell down here, which in the most brutal parts of history we're so focused on the literal that's all we've got, that connects to what's going on in heaven in some amazingly complicated way that keeps the human race alive.
And honestly, I think that's where that sense of just be a good person, I think that's quiet angels whispering in people's ears while they read the text, because the text says it a few times in thousands of pages, but it's not there all the time.
That's a great point.
But I think they just come away with that feeling, because I think their angels have been, the angels enjoyed the reading, and then they just be a good person.
I think that, so why does this happen, that you have so many people to whom Christianity or Judaism, where you're interacting with that text, is this source of comfort, inspiration, joy, hope, and morality, that you believe it's leading you to treat your neighbor better. And yet, so why is that just today for billions of people? Why is that happening? And yet you have this craziness in the text, so much so that people who don't use the Bible as a religious text can come in and just start reading it and say, "This is what?"
And it's very hard for people who don't read every word of it to deal with that, because like I don't remember that in there. I never heard about that in Sunday school or at church. Or
tell them about that national park. Like you gave this great analogy of the Bible is like Yellowstone Park or something.
Yeah. It struck me that it's vast in the ways that Swedenborg was just talking about, and yet so many people, so many tourists come there and they see the top three things. You know, you go to Old Faithful, or you go to whatever it is,
Grand Canyon of Yellowstone. Probably Norris Geyser Basin or Hayden Valley. Sorry.
Good knowledge.
It's just my favorite place in the world. That's all.
Yeah, that's cool. So you've got thousands of acres, maybe
millions.
Hundreds of square miles, millions of that's hardly touched. Occasionally, some backpacker will go out there or something, but there's a lot of it, and that's the way the Bible seems to me. It's so full of stories. So you keep hearing about Peter walking on the water, or you keep hearing about Daniel in the lion's den, but you don't hear about this. There's not much talk about this part.
How many Christian church services last Sunday read Leviticus chapter 25?
I think it's
45,
probably
46.
a small number. Yeah,
like probably zero. I can't imagine anyone having that in.
That coming up
so
in
what you pointed out, which I think is brilliant, is that maybe the way to explain that, the dichotomy between the experience of the religion based on the text and some of the parts of the less traveled parts of the text, is that when you make the Bible, that when you take it like a seed into yourself and let it start to grow, it does connect you to heaven. And in heaven, all the morality you're looking for is there, because angels see the love your neighbor as yourself and everything that's deeper in even these parts. And so they inspire you to be like that. So it's not really that you're taking the literal stuff in and saying, well, I should do what Leviticus says, but more you come into touch with God through heaven through that.
There was someone wrote to Swedenborg and said, which is the verse that connects you to heaven? As if there's like one way, like a hidden door.
Yeah.
And if you press this or you said that or whatever, that it would open up for you. And he said, they all do when rightly understood.
So even this one.
They're all the keys. They all work.
Okay, let me.
But it's going to be a challenge to show that in this case. We may fail.
It's going to be easy. No, the thing is, people will watch videos of people. For example, I think there's a whole cottage industry around. You have videos of people who are trying to go down a water slide and really get out of control, and it's embarrassing but hilarious.
Yeah, that's right.
People are going to want to watch us do that here.
Yeah, that's right. And if we fly off the side of the chute,
it's going to be better. We'll go.
Yeah,
that's how we're going to get those viral views. Secrets of Heaven 3305. The word is divine, though. So why is this shell divine? The word is divine, though, mainly because everything in it relates not to one nation or one people, but to the entire human race, as it is, as it was, as it will be. Even more universally, it relates to the Lord's kingdom in the heavens, and in the highest sense, it relates to the Lord himself. That is what makes the word divine.
I love that quote. Partly, I find it very evocative. I read that a little while ago. I think it was in the quote for the day, thing that the Swedenborg Foundation puts out. The not only as it was and as it is, how fascinating to tell you how the human race was. I love Swedenborg's stuff about how it used to be on this planet long before written history, but how the human race will be. Because there's that view out there that you and I've talked about before, that this is some Bronze Age document, like we really don't have to bother with this anymore. This was laws about sheep herding and what to do if, animal dies on your watch or something. We don't need it. And I love the fact that Swedenborg says, no, this is about the human race. And this is about the future. The future of the human race is in this book as well.
Yeah, because it is almost like a detailed biology textbook of human psychology, of the spirit, how your mind and heart, how your thoughts and feelings interact in order to lead you either to heaven or to hell. It is the fundamental knowledge of all knowledges. And it's for everyone, everywhere, all the time, because you take the whole thing, it's really just about you. It's really just about one person. Whoever the reader is, all these different characters and things, it's just about you. On the surface, this part of Leviticus where it's saying, okay, you who are my people, you can go and take those other people and do whatever you want with them.
Yeah.
That's absolutely not for everyone in the human race. What if you are one of those other people and you're reading this text and you say, oh, what do I do with this? But if this text is actually equally applicable to everyone at all times, giving the same message to everyone at all times, which is here's how you get yourself into heaven, then I would say, well, that sounds like the Word of God.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Something beyond human. It's not a human book.
Okay. Yeah, I was like, should we do this one before we get to the last one? But I think we should. This is Secrets of Heaven 7439. This is a little more specificity for the 6-year-olds watching about why we're talking about the Israelites so much, and why in this case it seems like God is favoring the Israelites in this story over these people that live around them.
Yeah.
The children of Israel are called Jehovah's people, not because they were any better than other nations. So we're talking about back in the time when this was written, but because they represented Jehovah's people. That is, those who belonged to the Lord's spiritual kingdom. Which is anyone, anywhere with the Lord in your heart. So that's the place in you.
Chosen people. So, yeah.
That's the place in you that the Israelites, you have Israelites in you.
Yes. And
I have Israelites in me.
Philistines and Moabites or whatever. Yeah.
You got them all. All those parts are in you. The Israelites and Jews had not by any means been chosen. They were simply accepted in order that they might represent the things of heaven. And this they had to do in the land of Canaan because the Lord's church, okay, it's all like so much and so out there. Let me just say this, but my little alarm bells are ringing like, this sounds like a lot. This sounds like ancient aliens. And this they had to do in the land of Canaan because the Lord's church had existed there since the most ancient times, and all places there had consequently become representative of heavenly and divine realities. Then also the word could be written in which the names would serve to mean such things as belonged to the Lord and his kingdom.
Whoa. So the idea was that I'm not sure exactly what that means. I've wrestled with that kind of thing before.
Skipped it.
But what it makes me think is that if you had people since ancient times who knew the meanings of things, like there's Mount Zion, or there's the Dead Sea, there's the Jordan River, there's the plains, and there's the heights, and Mount Carmel and all this. And if they said, yes, this is like the inner self, that's like the outer self, this is this part, that's that part, you cross over here. Because they had figured all that out, then by writing a book that's located there, you can use all that stuff that people already figured out of the meaning. And then the angels are like, yeah, Mount Carmel. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
It's like TMI. Like I know exactly what you're saying. I'm trying to think of like a new person coming in. It's like, what? So it's like that part of the world had become spiritualized in the way correspondences work.
Yeah.
So that there was some sort of like the spiritual world was close there. So the certain places in the physical world represented parts of the spiritual world. So what took place in order to have the word be written about it and sent everywhere needed to happen there. And so there was people there that could be used to represent it. It was all for the sake of the story.
Yeah. And I should probably warn the readers that if you read enough Swedenborg, unfortunately, this starts to make sense to you. Like you start to see how, the heights are always something interior,
Yes.
within the human spirit. The low-lying areas, like where the Philistines were, that's more external.
Yes.
Crossing over the Jordan is getting into this sacred territory. The other territories outside it, it starts to, I'm just warning you. There's time to turn back.
It's like, this is making a little too much sense. Well, this is why I feel like Swedenborg is an earthquake in human history, is because I do think he got to see, I think God showed him, this is how it really works.
Yeah.
And if the answer to it had been something really simple, it was just this. You just flip this upside down, and now you're reading the internal sense.
Yeah.
What an insult to all the scribes and monks and people of all traditions who have been poring over this, trying to discern how it worked. It's not, you didn't not do your diligence. It's there and it's rational, but you never would have guessed it.
It's deeply hidden. There are little hints on the surface.
Yeah.
But it's deeply hidden. And Swedenborg's the first to say that that's the case.
So this will end our scripture section here.
Okay.
But I feel like this quote from Swedenborg sums up the whole thing.
Okay.
The Secrets of Heaven.
Where do you find these
3147. I don't know. They just show up here. No, Karin did a lot of the research for this.
Oh, nice.
And
She's good.
this one, I think, is like the cream of the crop. Anyone can see. Oh, this is talking about there's a bunch of laws in the Old Testament about washing yourself. You got to wash your hands. If you touch this thing, you got to wash your hands.
The washing is a big thing. Yeah, the washing of,
so
pots and the body and all. Yeah,
again,
right, leprosy and all.
I'm sure it's good, but it seems a little frivolous for this to be. So this is what he says about that. Anyone can see that washing ourselves never purifies us of evil and falsity, but only the dirt that clings to us. Since it was among the mandatory rituals in that religion, though, it follows that the practice involves some special meaning, specifically that of spiritual washing or purification from the dirt that clings to a person inwardly. So I'm washing my hands because God said, but really what that's a concrete reminder and sort of a little effigy to, I need to purify my heart and mind from evil. I think anyone can kind of get that. And it goes on. Some people in the religion knew this at the time when they were being...
Interesting. Okay.
So they thought about purifying their heart or removing from their earthly self the evils belonging to love for themselves and love of the material world, and they made every effort to do so. These people participated in ritual washing as an outward sign of worship that had been commanded. So they knew it's not all about the washing. This is to refocus me. This is to get me thinking, oh yeah, it's all about the washing of the heart.
And I can see that if someone said, wash your spirit, I don't know how to do that. I don't know what that means.
And you couldn't even say wash, because wash is a physical thing. So you just have to say like...
You'd have to say cleanse. Your
spirit.
Exactly.
You don't know what that stuff is.
You don't know what it is. But we know what washing our hands and our feet. Yeah.
And then from that concrete analogy...
concrete image, the hope is that you'll springboard into something deeper.
That is, and I think it's the only way you can springboard into something deeper.
Yeah.
It's like learning words first and then being able to make sentences. We learn physical things first, and from those begin to be able to intuit spiritual processes.
Yeah.
So then it goes on. There were others, though, who did not know it and did not want to know. They thought the mere ritual of washing their clothes, skin, hands, and feet would purify them. And as long as they did these things, they would be allowed to live the lives of greed, hatred, vengefulness, ruthlessness, and savagery, which are spiritual filth. These people cultivated the ritual as an idolatrous one. Still, by means of the ritual, they were able to represent something of religion, and through the representation to present an image of it. This allowed a measure of connection between heaven and humankind before the Lord arrived.
And isn't there still, don't people bathe in the Ganges? Is that what it is? Don't you have pilgrimages where people go and they bathe? And I don't think the water's particularly clean or anything, but there's this, it's amazing how persistent this idea is that some sort of physical bathing with water will cleanse your spirit. That idea is still with us for sure. And baptism in a lot of Christian churches, the idea is that by itself, that'll do it. You're clean now, you know. You had that physical water, and so your sins have been wiped away. Most people, Swedenborg would say, oh, no. And boy, his list of filth, that was a pretty good filth list right there, right?
It's all the heavy hitters.
Pretty nasty, like revenge and...
And the act of keeping people as slaves holds those filth within it. Hatred, ruthlessness, savagery. And I think
that's the truth, because the only way to keep somebody as your property, you need to threaten them, you need to terrify them, right?
You need to be just cruel.
You need to be ready to practice physical violence if they're out of line, because it's not natural. It's like trying to hold I don't know, a big balloon underwater or something. Yeah. It's not natural, and so it takes things like that to keep it in place.
So this...
And creates tremendous fear in the recipient.
Right.
of it. And fear is not a great spiritual place to, it's a natural part of life. But if you live in fear every day, that's not the way we're supposed to be living. It's not good for our spiritual lives to be afraid like all the time.
So this passage from Secrets of Heaven, I think, with something that is benign, like washing hands, shows the dynamic, because it shows that there's something God does command in these laws. Wash your hands. And there's a spiritual meaning to that, which is wash yourself of greed, hatred, vengefulness, ruthlessness. And that throughout history, even back then, within religious people, I'm putting air quotes, scare quote, air quotes up, within religious people, there's some of them who understand this is just a ritual. It's meant to move me toward being a good person and remind me how to do it and keep it front of mind and provide insight and an anchor. Then there's other people who think, okay, I'll just do this little thing and then that's good. Then I don't have to actually be kind to people.
I don't
That's
have
good.
to change.
However, even people who are doing it with an evil heart can still represent it and so inspire other people. This is just like you can have a mega church preacher who, it turns out there's some scandal and he was doing terrible things and he gets caught. However, throughout the course of every Sunday, him going and preaching, there's probably a lot of people he really inspired
who get fed and
to be good, even though for him it was this empty shell because he's talking like do this and be good, but he's not really doing that. The person in the pew could very well
still works
for them.
Yeah.
So the stuff in the Bible is this representation of how to be good. That can, even if the people doing it are not good, it can illustrate the things that need to go on in the mind.
It can still connect heaven and earth.
Okay.
Which is its function. Yeah.
So that's a little bit about Scripture.
Good.
Shall we let's take a lighter fare for the next section.
Yeah.
Which is evil.
Evil, the problem of evil.
Okay.
Yep.
So let's go back to this video, and this is what they say about the way that the treatment of evil gets tied up into this.
Okay.
Even if it is the case that God, for some reason, couldn't even hint at the idea that maybe eventually we should be moving towards the abolition of the idea of owning human beings as private property, he just had to condone it.
But yes.
I still think it's the case that he would not permit a flat immorality, and I think you would agree with that too.
The question is whether he can or whether he can't. If he can't abolish the practice, then the idea of wooing people away from a particular type of sin through a gradualistic process is known throughout societies across human history. I mean, the gradualistic processes are the way that most things get done across human history. And by the way, the universal practice, unfortunately, up till today in many places in the world, is in fact the extreme version of what you're talking about. Raise everything, kill everyone. Right? That sort of stuff, unfortunately, does take place, even on planet Earth, even in the year 2023. And so the idea of a culture arising from the Bible that not only abolished slavery on its own shores, but then abolished slavery literally everywhere else, which is what Great Britain did. That, again, to separate that off from a tradition that also says that every human being is made in the image of God, right, which is the verse from Genesis, or that you have to treat the stranger well, right, which is repeated more than any injunction in the Bible, right? There are these traditions that are at war with each other inside the Bible, which is why there is this hotly fought kind of argument inside biblical circles. You know, these evils continue to exist in the human heart.
Even if this was a liberalizing force, and even if this was not as bad as other slavery, do you think that the ownership of other human beings under the conditions of the Hebrew Bible are immoral?
Yes.
So how do you account for God commanding something which you now see to be, or rather permitting something and explicitly and giving you details about how to do something which is proactively immoral?
So I'm glad that they brought that up, even though we had them bring it up, because I did a minute ago when we were talking feel like, did we ever address, yes, okay, correspondences and symbolism and all that, but why didn't he just get the slavery to stop? Why couldn't he have accomplished this symbolism a different way? I think that's what they're asking in that video. And I would say that the initial answer is that, first of all, to stop evil in the short run is not, yes, that's what God wants to do. It's not what was being done through the creation of the outer shell of the seed of the Old Testament, like we talked about. That's not the number one priority.
That's right. And what came to mind was Isaiah 7, chapter 15, which says something like, butter and honey shall he eat, so that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good. I think there's something about Scripture, like imagine if the Bible portrayed no evil. It didn't have adultery in it. It didn't like Bathsheba, the story. Yeah, that story wasn't in there. This all kinds of stories weren't in there. The Bible needs to be able to represent good and evil. The parables, Jesus' parables in the New Testament, have stories of people doing things or being violent or whatever, and then you have to sort of think, well, is that good or is that not? It's doing something a little different. It's revealing good and evil, which is very, very important. It's not just being silent about evil or not representing it at all.
Yeah. It's like playing the long game, because the intent was we have to create something that will perform this function of the word, which will keep heaven and earth connected in this, by having this one part of the world line up with correspondences so that can happen. But within it is this seed of all the morality that the human race should live by, which there's some of it's apparent on the surface. That's why Ben is saying there's all these injunctions to treat the stranger well.
Yes, right.
But
which is beautiful.
That is not, it sounds strange to say, but that's not the primary thing the Old Testament at the time was meant to do, is to make people behave as humanely as possible. I think God is trying to do that, but I think there are limits. How successful has God been getting rid of evil?
I don't mean to be the bearer of bad tidings, but there's a little bit of it left in the world.
Where? Yeah.
I know it surprises you, and it's amazing that social media doesn't cover it or make that clear.
Yeah. So, yes, it seems like God has an evil problem. That, yes, I would say that, and this is the position that Alex is taking, that if there's a God, he should be trying to make things good.
Yes.
But
right.
yeah,
he should be trying to make this a good world.
Here we are swimming in evil. This is the problem of evil still today. And I think that, yes, God in some ways cannot eradicate certain kinds of evil immediately.
Yes, given the system that's set up. And I love what Swedenborg has to say.
Enough of me trying to represent it. So this is what Swedenborg says about the way in which God, because we're talking about the expression of evil rather than the existence of evil. So evil is like in the human heart. The evil is the enjoying of doing destructive things. So the actual external act, like you're conquering someone and keeping them as a slave,
yes,
that's the expression of evil, but
the heart.
Evil's already in the people's hearts who would be willing to do something like that.
All these things.
So
yeah, I love the Lord's statement about, it's not about whether you're eating cheese or not, or having wheat on the Sabbath or something like that. Yeah. It's what comes out of the human heart. That's the problem.
And Jesus, by the way,
and it was already in there. I mean, it's important that it manifest.
Yeah.
In some way, like if you didn't even know it was there, be worse for your spirit.
Well, okay, here we go.
Oh yeah.
Divine Providence 251. The Lord cannot rescue any of us from our hell unless we see that we are in it and want to be rescued.
Oh.
This cannot happen unless there are instances of permission that are caused by laws of divine providence.
Very interesting. It doesn't say, I know he gets into it in other passages, but so interesting to say that he cannot relieve you of it. Like you have to know you're in it and you have to want not to be. So that's our own hearts and our own minds. Minds being what we know, and our heart wanting. Do you want out? Do you realize you're not in a good position? Do you want out?
Yes.
And the only way to get there is to have this. That's why the Lord allows so many things to happen, so many bad things to happen, is that the nature of evil has to be visible. I mean, if no one could see it, how would you ever fight it? How would you address it?
And I think,
and a lot of it is, to me, there's sort of a supposition in some of the video clip that we saw that God is supposed to address these things. Like God was supposed to get rid of this evil. And from my understanding, the way Swedenborg puts it out, no, that's human beings' job. Like we created slavery. We have to get rid of that. For God to sort of come in ex machina and just get rid of it, doesn't work that way.
And if we're saying that the way that God can deal with evil is to command against it, and then that will stop it, That didn't work for any of his other commandments.
No.
The entire Bible is, okay, don't do all these things, don't murder, and there's tons of murders going on all the time. Don't do adultery. You just mentioned King David, which is one of God's main guys in the book, right? Goes and does murder and then adultery. That nobody's listening. It's so God saying don't do it does not have that impact. And we already established that the intent of creating the word with this specific people. This is only a tiny little fraction of the people on planet Earth at the time.
Yeah.
What's he doing here? God is at work in every single person's life. He's in all cultures at all times. He's trying to get people to reduce their evil and to do good. So he's doing that here as anywhere else. But also here, there's this extra layer of, I need you guys to be this representation. So these people were already gonna. There's something burning in their heart, this like will to dominate that leads to them, like many people around the world, like almost everywhere at that time, people are enslaving each other.
Yes.
So these people are, and as we're about to get to in this one, God cannot get that evil out of their heart at the time. So what he's going to do is say, all right, for this part here, as well as working on each of you and working in the hearts of people who are trying to stop what is evil, I need you to do this representative stuff, since you're already doing this, in order to, through correspondences, make the whole thing work. You know, like there's two things going on at once there. And the commands in the Bible are more about, let's create this seed that right now it's a mess. We can't clean everything up, but in the future, this is going to clean up the whole human race. Okay, this is Divine Providence 278. Evils cannot be set aside unless they come to light. This does not mean that we have to act out our evils in order to bring them to light, but we need to look carefully not only at our actions, but also at our thoughts and what we would do if it were not for our fear of the laws and of ill repute. We need to look especially at which evils we see as permissible in our spirit and do not regard as sins, for eventually we do them. If we are in a hellish community, the only way the Lord can lead us out is under the laws of his divine providence. One of them says that we must see that we are there, must want to get out, and must ourselves make an effort with what seems to be our own strength, which I think is what you were getting at earlier.
And the evil serves a very useful function, and it's actually needed in this way. It's not as though God didn't create evil in the first place or intend it. But as long as it's there, he'll use it to good end. So earlier in Divine Providence, it talks about the different things that evil can do for you, how it helps you get clarity. It's for contrast. And I'm reminded of the Psalm 23, which says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. And I used to always say that psalm, and it's like, oh, this is comforting, helps me go to sleep. And then wait, presence of my enemies? How about absence of my? I'd really like a table in the absence of my enemies, if that's on the menu. But it's actually, the presence of the enemies is very helpful. You really understand when there's opposition, or when you really look in the face of evil. It really helps you understand what love is, what the contrast is, and so on.
So we can today look at that and say, slavery is evil. We don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So that must mean this is not really about that.
And that way you can be on the lookout for it, even if it's just a slight little dominating moment in a marriage or a parent-child relationship or a workplace situation or whatever, if you become aware of it, what it really looks like with people who are chained in the basement and or something like that, then when there's just even a hint of that, you realize, I do not want that.
Yeah.
No, we've got to both be in freedom here.
Like that you can see that where that evil would lead, where you see where it's led in history.
Yeah.
So if it's there, it might as well be reported on and people can learn from it. Okay, so that's a little bit about evil, and yes.
I think we did it very thoroughly.
Well, just that, right. Yes, God could not stop all the evils of the time there, because the expressions of evil are just the symptoms of this disease of having evil deep in the heart, that people were cruel, and even if you stopped it up, nobody do anything bad to each other, that would burst out in worse ways. That's a whole different discussion, but we are acknowledging, yes, it's not ideal. And I think there's in Divine Providence, there's how God would want it to be and what he can do with the pieces he has. I think Swedenborg sort of argues for a God that is in some ways limited. It cannot violate human freedom.
True. and has principles that operating by.
Yeah.
That's right.
So that's
right.
that.
And it's a little bit, it reminds me of surgeries where, I mean, it's very odd, but I've been through one of these where they leave the wound open. Like, it's very important to leave it open.
Right.
Because worse things will happen if we close it all up. It'll actually be worse. So to have a wound that's draining, it's a gross thing to bring up, but the it's very important, and the whole human race is kind of going through a lot of things like that, where it's sort of important to have that be visible or have that be open.
Swedenborg does compare evil to, I think in his day there was a lot of wounds getting infected and people dying from them, and he says that
right.
if evils are not acknowledged and seen and given the option even sometimes to be expressed, that they will devour the human race from within.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's part of why God didn't just say at the time, wipe all this stuff out, but instead was playing the long game of like, I'm going to try to help every single person in every moment, but also I'm sneaking in this Trojan horse through the word that is going to eventually change everything. All right, so let's get to, why is that Trojan horse so weird? Why does it have so many weird details, including these laws here we've been talking about?
And so when I open the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, and when I look at the texts saying that if you lay siege to a city, you can kill, if the Lord delivers it into your hand, you can kill the men and the women, or you can kill the men and keep the women and the children and the livestock as plunder, as Deuteronomy says, and in the very next verse. The very next chapter says that, if you see a good-looking woman, and I'm not interjecting that. If somebody finds an attractive woman,
yes, Ifatoar is the actual Hebrew. Yeah.
Then they can take them for themselves, and if they want them as their wives, and they take them home, they shave their head, they cut off their fingernails, they give them 30 days to mourn their old husband, who you may very well have just killed, and then you can take them as your wife. When Numbers 31 has Moses instruct the slaughter of the Midianites, saying, kill all the men, and this time the women get killed too, but not the women who haven't slept with a man. And why might that be? And it says that, keep them for yourselves. And I hear all the time that this is some kind of liberalizing process. Maybe it's because, these people wouldn't survive on their own. It's some kind of protective measure to make sure that you're looking after them. If that's the case, then why does it only apply to the virgins? That seems a little bit suspect to me.
And also, if you are God and you are pragmatically attempting to woo people away from slavery, was it a practicable thing to simply, quote unquote, abolish slavery? Or
here's an idea, for example.
Tradition?
In the book of Exodus, God says, I think in chapter 21, maybe 22, says that if you have a Hebrew slave, you are to let them go after 7 years. If that Hebrew slave comes to you with a wife, then after the 7 years, you let them go too. If you give the Hebrew slave a wife and they have children, then after those 7 years are up, you give the man a choice. He can go after the 7 years, as per, but you keep his children and his wife. Or, and here the scripture says, if he says, I love my wife, I love my kids, and my master, as if that's going to be one of the principal considerations, then he can stay with you, at which point you take him outside, you pierce his ear like cattle, and he becomes your property for life. Now, here's a suggestion, for example. If it was already established that Hebrew slaves go after 7 years, and it's already established that if they come with a wife, they can go after 7 years, then if I give them a wife and they have children, would it not be, it doesn't seem to me particularly revolutionary. It doesn't seem to me the kind of thing that would have caused such social discohesion that God just couldn't have found a way to do it, to say, well, why not let the whole family go free after those 7 years? With the knowledge beforehand that if you give this Hebrew slave of yours a wife and children, they'll get to leave with them. That seems to me, for example, a minor improvement that would not cause this kind of revolutionary, earth-shifting, he couldn't have just gotten away with slavery. Maybe that's true. But something as obvious as this to me, it seems that if that is the case, that could have easily been done, then the failure to do so and the keeping of that Hebrew wife and their children as the master's property, that itself becomes an immorality that is dictated.
Okay, well, Alex would love this I hope he watches this podcast, because we are going to deal with that exact verse that he's quoting there. And this is the Exodus part. You talked about how some of these slavery laws come from Exodus.
Right.
That verse he's quoting is from Exodus. We've got them in Leviticus too. But before we go in and talk about, why did God say all that stuff instead of just saying some other stuff that would end up better for the human beings involved? Let's just stop for a minute and linger on how weird this whole details thing is. Because what a lot of their conversation is rotating around is not just that God doesn't abolish slavery, but he says, here, you have to do it exactly like this.
And the Bible is seldom vague. In other words, all those sacrifices, you have to dip your right big toe in the blood. There's very specific things. So many of the stories have these strange details. Even in the New Testament and in the parables of Jesus, there are little details like that.
Yeah, and Swedenborg would say that's the smoking gun, that this is symbolic of something. Because otherwise, why is this, let alone the parts where it's violent and immoral, just if you're going to sit there for chapters and chapters and say, here's how you build the tabernacle.
Yeah.
First, you got to make this thing out of gypsum wood, and this thing has to be cypress. If I'm opening up the book and I'm looking for, this is God talking to the human race, and you just go on forever about how to build things.
You could build a kind of mini Bible out of just the building instructions that are in the volume.
That there has to be.
They go on. I think there's 9 chapters at the end of Ezekiel about this future temple that's going to come with all the same kind of detail again of like this is how the walls will be and this is how the doors will be and everything.
There's no explanation for that except that this must mean something deeper.
Yes.
There's no way that God said, okay, I'm going to give this book, and some of the stuff in it is for everyone, like love your neighbor as yourself, but also I'm going to give 8 chapters just to the architects of this temple, whoever's going to build it in the future. I imagine it'll be less than 0.0001% of the human race, even if it's a ton of people working on this. But this is all for you whenever you build that. No, there's something more going on here.
The definition of a narrow audience. And make sure you get those 11 clasps on the one curtain and 10 on the other, because the one is supposed to link the 2 curtains together. But don't have 9.
It's worse.
It's got to be 11.
Worse than IKEA, even. No, I'm just kidding. So this is from Secrets of Heaven 8981, where Swedenborg is commenting on a passage like this. He says, surely anyone can see that this rule holds a secret knowable only to those to whom it is revealed, because on its surface it appears to violate divine justice.
Oh.
This is about the slavery laws.
Right.
Of course, this can't really be about this because, again, that's what the human heart sees. That's the objection to the Bible. It's why even people who love the Bible don't want to act on that, because it violates divine justice.
You know it's unjust. Yeah.
Many other demands Jehovah made of the children of Israel are similar. Even the ones that didn't seem ghastly, at least were bizarre.
Bizarre.
Although,
not mixing meat and milk and things, just all these specific things.
Going back to that comment that said, if God can tell people not to eat shellfish, he can tell them not to have... The whole thing is just a nightmare of weirdness and violence. How is this God telling the human race what's going on?
Yes, right.
Outside... Although on the outside, these commands seem contrary to divine justice, as I said, they are not. They result from laws of the divine design for the heavens, which are the very epitome of just laws. But those laws remain hidden unless they are unfolded from the literal sense by means of the inner sense.
So the justice is in there, but the justice is not on the outside. In fact, it can be kind of infuriating or seem unfair or outrageous or horrible.
You've heard of a show, don't tell?
Okay.
We've been telling for quite a long time now.
Yes, we have.
It's just occurring to me. Why don't we show?
Okay.
Instead.
Now,
so let's take...
What should we take?
Let's take some of these slavery commandment passages and give you what Swedenborg says the heavenly laws inside them are. They're not actually about slavery. They are about something that goes on within each person.
Okay. Yeah.
Here we go. Right. This is us giving you the goods. This is Secrets of Heaven 3020. In many people... Oh, before I start this, why even mention slavery at all in the Bible? Why have a situation where someone is controlling someone else? Yeah. Why is that the correspondence used? That's what this addresses. In many people, the earthly mind controls the rational mind. Or to put it another way, the outer self controls the inner self. The only people in whom it does not dominate but serves are those who devote themselves to goodness, inspired by neighborly love, that is, who allow the Lord to lead them.
That's profound, and it seems surprisingly psychological for an 18th century writer.
Yeah.
You know, and it almost suggests there's a majority of the population run by their outer selves.
Yeah,
They're doing, you know, some sort of appetites or some, I want to get this position, or I want to, you know, I need to be, or I need to get revenge on this person, or whatever their project is. It's some lower self project that's taken precedence over loving the neighbor. And by the way, I think slavery in a way is an ultimate case. Like, what is the point of slavery? You're dominating someone else, but by and large, it's for financial reasons. Like, you're getting a financial benefit at the expense of your neighbor.
And so that's low,
one of something lower
controlling something
is
higher.
Controlling something higher.
Which is
like you're setting
life.
aside your normal sense of this is a human being, this person's just like me, and they go through the same thing, they have the same sorrows, the same aspirations, everything. I'm going to set that aside because I'll get financial gain out of ruining their life.
So look what we did here. We shunked it. We shunked it in. Meaning
nice
before...
word. How do you spell that?
It's from the Latin doshunka.
Good.
We thought we were talking about thousands of years ago, and we were talking about a bunch of people living together in a nation who go out and raid other peoples and enslave them, and it's this big, giant, I don't know, Game of Thrones. Actually, shunk. It's talking about you inside your own mind. There is a controlling that goes on. And it's one of two controlling. There's your outer self, which is your materialistic, ego-driven, power-hungry side of your narcissistic tendencies.
And loving wealth and material pleasures, or those things being the primary goal of your life.
There's that part of you. We all have it. And then there is the part of you that loves, that wants the welfare of others, that's
altruistic, that kind of will jump down into the subway, to rescue somebody, a total stranger.
Yes.
Sacrifice your own life.
Yeah, that pops out. And you say, I didn't know I had it in me. Yeah. Just like the negative side is the mob mentality and everybody gets riled up and you do something you thought you would never do.
Right.
But then there's also this side where someone needed help, so I just did it. I didn't know what I was doing.
And they say, anybody would have done what I did.
Those are the... they sure do say that. Those are the two extremes of the outer and inner self. Somebody is going to control you, and somebody is going to be controlled. One of those two. Either the outer self is controlling the inner self. There's a slavery going on inside you. One configuration is good, where if we willingly say, I'm going to have these outer parts of me that are not looking out for the good of all, if I'm going to have those instead obey love and obey what is good, that's a good. But if it's flipped and the cravings and the insanity,
or the petty revenge fantasies, or whatever it is,
and I say that's going to control me, and that's going to subvert my duty to my neighbor to love them, that's the bad slavery. So there has to be...
There's good slavery and bad slavery in effect.
Inside
when you get it out of the realm...
Yeah,
when you get it out of the realm of one person controlling another, and it's internal in you, there's actually a good kind where that outer self is serving. And it's so helpful to have an outer self, because the outer self still is concerned about ego issues. It can tell you, oh, you're being trod on in this situation, or, it can give you helpful information. But if it's not running your life, they say, thank you for sharing that. It's okay. It's a risk I took in this situation, or whatever, It can serve the overall goal.
If you try to apply the Bible externally to a bunch of people, it's horrific. If you shunk it down and it's about the different parts of you, then it's good. And
I have to remember that.
That's what the internal sense is. Yeah, that's what I did my PhD thesis on.
Yeah, on shunking. Yeah.
Okay. Let's read another part of that same number.
Okay.
As we explore this deeper. Our earthly self, as it relates to our reasoning self, or our outward self as it relates to our inward, resembles the manager of a household. Everything in us works the way a single household does, or in other words, the way a single family does. There is the part that functions as the head of the household, the parts that function as the servants. The rational mind is what oversees everything as the head of the household and organizes the earthly mind by exerting an influence on it. The earthly mind is what carries out and administers orders. The contents of the earthly mind and the functions it performs show that the earthly mind is a different mind from the rational one, occupies a lower level, and has a degree of autonomy.
A completely separate self, in effect, in us. It's amazing that hundreds of years later, now some aspects of modern psychology, internal family systems theory, are getting to exactly these kind of points, looking at one individual as having a whole family of parts in there and how they interact, the managers and the exiles and so on, what dynamic is going on in there. So it's fascinating that Swedenborg is saying this hundreds of years ago. It almost sounds so modern, it's hard to believe he said
and
that.
You are working on a book about that.
Am I? That is so exciting.
With one of the guys who founded that discipline of family systems theory.
Bob Falconer, I guess it must be.
Coming
Bob.
soon from Swedenborg Foundation. But it's not even Swedenborg unpacking that. And not even Swedenborg saying that. According to Swedenborg, this is what the Bible is. All this time, this has been sitting there saying, this is how you work. This is how the different parts of the things at war inside you, the parts that want to control that are good, the parts that want to control that are bad, and this is how they should go. You should have this doing that so that you can be a good person. That's what's been in there the entire time.
Amazing.
Okay, so you have this earthly part of you that should not be ruling over.
Right.
Because if it does, it's a difference between somebody who you suddenly realize this person is not in control of themselves. They might do something that's dangerous, or they're like whatever's running the ship is not. So that the feeling of being around that. It puts you on edge versus cooler heads prevail. I know this person has got themselves under control. I can talk about this touchy subject with them. Let's go deeper into this. So this is starting to set up the context of why would we ever talk about control? Doesn't make sense with multiple people. Inside you, there should be a hierarchy.
There's a lot of control. Yeah.
This is Secrets of Heaven 5305. The word often speaks of a servant, which in an inner sense means something that serves something else. In general, it means anything low down in relation to something up high. The orderly way is for what is lower to serve what is higher. And to the extent that it does so, it is called a servant.
Well, there you can sort of see why this would be allowed in the text. I mean, it was something that was going on in the culture at the time anyway. Yeah. But the fact that, no, this is an order that everyone who has a human being, everybody who is somebody, has these parts in themselves. And so to be able to have rules and laws about that actually inwardly show how this relationship is supposed to go, that starts to make sense of why that's the perennial question. Why is that? How did that make the cut? Why is that in the book?
You apply these laws to yourself, to parts of your own internal structure. That's where this belongs.
Yeah.
And the people at the time could not understand that and also could not represent that. So at the time, God gave them certain marching orders that were not worse than what was going on around them, but were not ideal. But that was the outer shell of the seed. And God was trying to make people good at that time, but people were barbaric, and there was a plan underway to slowly. But what's growing out of that now, and what has grown into the human race from interacting with this text, is impetus toward, no, work on yourself, become a better person.
And in a way, when we, as you were saying a moment ago, when we interact when we get to know a new person, when we're thinking about hiring somebody or having somebody babysit our kids or whatever, isn't this in the back of our heads sort of a question that we have about how do their inner self and outer self relate?
Yes.
Are they in possession of themselves? Are they just going to go hog wild, or do they have a part that's going to kind of monitor the situation and not let it get out of control?
Absolutely.
And aren't these parables in the New Testament where the master leaves and then the servants, are they drunkenly beating each other? Or is the household in good shape when the master comes back, kind of thing? It's talking about the same thing.
I was going to say, what they say, like the inmates are running the asylum.
Yeah, that's right.
That's
not a situation that you want to be in or experience.
So now let's talk about some of these slavery laws and the internal sense of them. This is Leviticus 25.
Okay.
This is back to the one we said in the beginning. This is Leviticus 25. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. Mm-hmm. From them you may buy slaves. Seems like this is just an in-group, out-group thing.
Yes. Right.
You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. As we said, very offensive in the literal sense.
Yeah.
Shocks the conscience.
Literally says your property.
So that's not what the Bible is about. The Bible is about one individual. So in the Bible, whenever it says Israelites, whenever it's talking about the Israelites and what the Israelites should do, they symbolize the part in you that is the church. So the part in you that is responsive to God and is good. That's why Israelites are called the chosen people, because in you, the Israelite part of you is the part that God can lead, the goodness in you that God can lead.
Ironically, it's the part of you that's chosen God, in effect,
Right.
sort of the other way around, but yes.
And so in the Bible, just in the text, I'm not saying this was true of the character of the people at those times, but in the text of the Bible, the term Israelites symbolizes the church and us. The other nations symbolize earthly and secular thoughts and feelings in us. So you have your spiritual
Thoughts
you
and feelings.
and the secular you.
Whoa. When you start to examine yourself, you realize you have these different aspects and they don't even necessarily get along with each other.
Yep.
You have very high values or vision or, you have grand hopes of like, I want to be a loving kind of person, or I want to be the kind of person other people can rely on. And then you have these other parts that just get these little nasty idea of some little practical joke you could play on somebody at their expense. And you don't even realize at the time you're having the thought, this is completely incompatible with that other. What does this have to do with that other loving part? But we have all these nations in us, quote unquote.
Yeah. That I recently took my daughter to a concert. It was her first concert, and it was way late on the first day of school. And this was a band that she had started to really get into, and she knew the songs. And there was another band that was opening, and it took a long time. It was late. But when that band came out and they started to play, she was so excited, and she was singing along. And I was saying to my wife, that was one of the best moments of my life. And there was a certain part of me that recognized and loved that moment. There's all kinds of other things that I like in my life and chase after. There's all kinds of ego stuff and materialistic stuff, and I want to be good and great. I mean, better than people and all that. And all that stuff, the part of me that loved that, that's the part that should be the boss.
Yeah.
That because that's a genuinely better thing than me sitting here and trying to stroke my ego. So I could see, that there's some, that's like the Israelites. It's like the part that's just, she's happy, so I'm happy.
Right.
And in every human, that's the holy part. That part,
And the other parts that have to figure out the parking, or that it's a pain that this or that, whatever it is about it, getting the tickets or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You're going to serve because this is what we're doing.
That's right. So that's what we're saying. There's something in there that's really good. And that part should not be the only part, but that's the one that should be like, okay, what do we do next?
What are we doing?
Okay. So Swedenborg starts to explain this verse.
He has more?
Yes. We already got into this. I was so transported telling you that story.
That's a great story.
I want to go back and relive that. Earthly truth means facts of every kind because they belong to the earthly realm. That's like where do we park? How much does a ticket cost? Okay, then you know how it says your male and female slaves? Isn't that weird how
it keeps hammering that, yeah.
So, male slaves, again, in the text, we're not talking about real human beings, we're talking about a part of you. Male slaves actually symbolize truth on the rational and factual planes. A lowly kind of truth that therefore ought to serve spiritual truth.
Wow. So it's not even breaking it out to parts of yourself now. It's saying types of truth that might exist in the same mind. Like you have certain things that you know or insights that you have that are higher than other, things that you know that may just be some worldly kind of knowledge.
Let's say that I did sports medicine. And I knew, I have a spiritual truth that is This athlete needs to get healed because what's going to make them happy is to be able to go and do the thing that they love and feel useful in, which is to be athletic. And that's my spiritual truth. I have a bunch of natural truth, which is here's how you set a cast, here's how you do an IV.
You can't take this and that at the same time. It'll cause a side effect.
And even here's how much I can charge for each of these things.
Yes.
All of that should serve, we're trying to do good to this person.
Right. How long did I work on this person and all that? Yeah.
Female slaves actually symbolize the goodness that goes with that truth. So any information has a reason to do it.
Yes,
which is
a motivation or something. Yeah, right.
It says of that goodness, which is somewhat lowly as well, and therefore ought to serve. For example, if I say, well, I know I can charge this much for this service, I do like that money. That's fine, but it should not be running the operation.
Right. Like, for instance, you could say, if I can really heal this person, I will have an amazing reputation. Like, how many other athletes really need these services? So if I could hit it out of the park with this, my stock is going to go way up.
Right.
It's not a horrible thing to have that motivation, but if there was something that you could do or say to them that was simpler than you being the most amazing doctor ever, it's just like get more sleep or something, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So
it needs to take a back seat. It's still in the car.
Yes.
But it needs to sit in the back.
There's times it can do things, but it ultimately needs to be taking orders.
Yeah.
So then, all right, so there's a little short, simple one. Now let's go into what Alex O'Connor quoted, Exodus 21, 2-5. And actually, we'll go line by line.
We could skip this.
No. This is where we're gonna become the great sports medicine doctors of explaining weird stuff in the Bible. This is gonna make us rich and famous.
No, I'm on board now.
Okay, so let me just read it out loud. It says, "When you buy a male Hebrew slave, 6 years he shall."
And that's interesting. This Hebrew slave. So these are their own people. Now these are not the foreigners.
That's right.
This is your own. Okay.
When you buy a male Hebrew slave, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th go out to freedom for free. Again, all these weird details. If he comes with just his own body, he shall go out. If he is the master of a woman, his woman shall go out with him.
So there's layers here where you're boss of him and he's boss of her.
If his master gives him a woman and she bears him sons or daughters, the woman and her children shall be her masters, and the slave shall go out with just his own body.
Wow, so break up the family.
It's just bizarre. And if the slave says firmly, I adore my master, my woman and my children, I will not go out. Right. His master shall bring him to God and bring him to the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and the slave shall serve him permanently.
Yeah, that's like one of those metal punches, isn't it? It's like a,
Yes. So again, applied to...
And why the specificity of the doorpost... And why the ear, and then it's supposed to be pierced with an awl? Why that?
If you were in a class, like a theoretical philosophy class, and there had never been the Bible, and the professor, who was wise and learned and had the respect of a great many people in the field, said, let's do a thought experiment where we will imagine that God wrote something and sent it to the human race. You will be graded on how divine your information is, how applicable, how useful, how befitting a God this is. Go. And you come back with that in your hand, D- at best.
That's right.
Probably F.
Probably F.
So, but it's the outer shell. It's the outer shell of the seed.
It's not the DNA.
It's not the DNA. So what is the DNA? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's attached to the outer shell. Here we go. It's the Secrets of Heaven, 8973. When you buy a male Hebrew slave, symbolizes people in the church who commit to doctrinal truth, but not the good it teaches. Hebrew is the church in you.
Minute. That's sort of thing that afflicts a lot of different religions, right? Like you'd say, oh, I'm into that belief system. I don't particularly care to treat other people well, but the belief system is very important.
That's right. So that means you're taking religion in a way where you're putting the externals of religion ahead of the internals.
Ahead of the real point, which is loving thy neighbor.
So that is a tendency that could go somewhere good, but should not be running things.
Right. Right.
So if you think of the master in this passage as your inner self and the deeper spirituality there. This is the part of you that should be
a higher part of yourself. Yeah,
that
like
should
your best
be,
self. They say, right?
Yes, your best self should be in charge. The male Hebrew slave is external doctrinal ideas. This is what Swedenborg says it is. And then the woman is the goodness or pleasure attached to those ideas.
Okay.
So if we set that up, actually Karin wrote out approximation. Swedenborg's explanation of the internal sense of these is long and complex, but we've got kind of here's the cliff notes of how it would go. So let's show in action, never before seen in this part of the world. How about you read the Bible, and I'll read what Swedenborg says the internal sense is. And you can see it joined at every single point. Okay?
Okay.
All right.
Here we go. We'll just do it lightning round, right?
That's right.
When you buy a male Hebrew slave, 6 years he shall serve.
If you acquire doctrinal knowledge in your memory that's not united with good feelings and a good life, you'll work hard to confirm it as truth. Pause. People are just going to say we're making this up. 6. The number 6 is always associated with labor. That's why there's 6 days.
6 days you shall labor, do all your work.
Rest.
That's
on
right.
And then in
the
creation,
rest is the 7th.
God rested on the 7th day. I'm just saying, this is going to sound like we're just pulling out of nowhere, but this is the way it is throughout the whole Bible. Okay,
That's
go.
right. And in the 7th, go out to freedom for free.
After that hard work, God will confirm the truth in your mind as a free gift for you.
If he comes with just his own body, he shall go out.
If you entered into that work without any pleasure in it, only because you believed it would save you, then you'll continue to have the truth memorized, but not to enjoy it or love it.
We've all been there, I have to say. If he is the master of a woman, his woman shall go out with him.
If you entered into that work of learning truth with the pleasure of getting admiration, which is not the true pleasure, or worldly profit or rank, then you'll continue to have that kind of pleasure linked to the doctrine in your mind. But that attitude separates you from the deeper spirituality of your inner self.
So they're two of a kind. If his master gives him a woman, like this is not, he didn't go out and get her, the master supplied
which is
the woman.
The good part of you.
Right. If his master gives him a woman and she bears him sons or daughters, the woman and her children shall be her master's, and the slave shall go out with just his own body.
If during the process you received some deeper feelings through your inner self from the Lord, which produced deeper insights and impulses, but you don't want to hang on to those gifts, then you'll continue life without them.
And if the slave says firmly, I adore my master, my woman, and my children, I will not go out free.
But if you felt pleasure in those deeper feelings, insights, and impulses, and don't want to leave them behind,
his master shall bring him to God.
Then your inner self can bring your external ideas into the divine plan.
And bring him to the door or to the doorpost.
Again, door and doorpost always have the same symbolism in the Bible. The doctrinal truth in your memory can be introduced into communication with spiritual goodness, so things at the threshold.
Doorways are always, like it's this earthly thing is connected with the spiritual thing. So that's why it's a doorpost, not just a handy piece of wood.
Yes.
That's for awling.
Ubiquitous awling spot, right?
Yeah. And his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and the slave shall serve him permanently.
And become permanently obedient to higher truth and goodness, the ear being a symbol of obedience throughout the Bible.
Wow. It's pretty cool when you start to see it put together it's mind-boggling, but the fact that the ear has that meaning and Simeon is, means hearing or listening and is that one of the 12 tribes of Israel, and just all these things start to fit together when you start to put it that way.
It's speaking a language. You start to see it's speaking a language, and then it goes from we're in bizarro land that without warning veers into immorality and back into morality, seemingly with no regard for human life.
And always a background weirdness.
Just always way too many details. Suddenly you realize, oh, no. This is talking about something very relevant and very useful and completely shunked into you and your soul. So it's doing is teaching you to be a better person.
And it's revealing these are the different ways this can go. This thing can go off on its own. It can go off with a pleasure in, my own ego. It can go off with a higher purpose. It can hang around the higher purpose. It can decide, look, I'm really part of this whole thing. I want to be part of this goodness, and just sign on the dotted line, and then it's permanent.
So the last quote for today. So we tried to walk you through that. Here's Swedenborg summarizing a little bit of this.
Yes.
The inner meaning of this very number is that people who have truth alone and not a corresponding goodness, but nonetheless pleasant memories of spiritual goodness, communicate and connect to some extent with spiritual goodness. So you're in an obscure state where you kind of get it with regards to the spiritual life and being good, but there's a bunch of earthly stuff still in there. This was represented by the piercing of a slave's ear by his master at the door or at the doorpost. A door means communication. A doorpost means connection. An ear means obedience. Piercing the ear with an awl is representative of the state in which such a person would remain. This is how this scripture is taken by the angels present with a person reading it. They do not think about a door, a doorpost, an ear, the piercing of an ear, or even a slave. Instead, they think about the communication and connection mentioned above. Just like we get a piece of that when we're washing our hands because it's religious, but we're not thinking about soap and water and dirt on your hands. We're thinking about purifying the heart from evil. That is the way correspondences work.
And it reminds me of Bob Dylan had a great song, You Gotta Serve Somebody. So it might be the devil.
It might be the devil.
Or it might be the Lord.
We haven't sung a song this whole episode.
But you're going to have to serve somebody. It's so true. That's kind of what I'm getting out of this lesson, is that your outer self can either serve ego issues and so on, self-aggrandizement and all that, which is ultimately actually serving the interests of hell, which is creating more isolation in the world. Everyone's in it for themselves, breakdown of society, all that kind of thing. Or you become a servant to the Lord, and your own best self. And if those really are the choices, then no matter what the culture of the times in which the Bible was written were, it would need to have something that reflected this, because this message needed to be said. It needs to be said that the parts of us need to relate in a certain way to each other. And how is it going to explain that in a way that we understand? Using the example of people dominating over other people was actually a handy way to express it, because I get that. I get that one part does not have its own freedom. It's serving the other part, whatever the other part says, that goes.
Yeah, and whether or not you think this is a good justification for God using that kind of phrasing, those were the paints that were in the palette at the time. That's what people were doing to each other. I think that even though before I said, the correspondences have to line up one-to-one, I think there's a number that in a perfect world, God could have written this message, wouldn't have needed to write this, but could have written this with something less terrible than slavery. But that was what people were doing at the time. That was what people understood. So that at that time, the angels around people could at least understand the good things meant by it and keep heaven and earth together. That's what we gave God to work with. So that's why this is in there. The intent, though, was never to keep this part of the human race. This is, I think, why you see, as they mentioned in that video, people in the Judeo-Christian tradition were instrumental in eventually saying, this is insane, we can't do this.
Yeah.
And it wasn't coming from them. It was coming from heaven and angels
coming in, saying,
look, this is out of the slavery is completely abhorrent to good morality.
And the fact that the Bible, that message, is for the state of the human race as it was, as it is, still today, and as it will be in the future. This is an issue now. The all-piercing isn't happening on a massive scale, as far as I know.
Yep.
But the relationship of the outer self to higher things in yourself, watching with disappointment as you fail yourself, because I said when I went there that I wasn't going to do this or that, or I wasn't going to say that, and then I just couldn't resist. I got in there.
Yes.
And I slipped. Well, yeah, we're sorting out how that relationship is working. And is that working for you, or are you working for it? What's going on in there? That's going to continue. That's with us now, and that will continue to be with us. And that is what makes this book universal and amazing.
A lot of people running around, myself at various times throughout the day, with the wrong stuff running the show inside me. And so I can learn from this. And yeah, it's about the state of things to come. I hope that when, way in the future, the human race is in whatever state the Bible gets it into, then they will look back on this YouTube video and say, that wasn't that good. That wasn't that good. Like, they tried, but I was confused by the end. But they were trying their best. And I got a few good things out of it. Because that's really, when I just, this, it's such a tricky thing to communicate.
Yeah.
But there is this core of it that, I get it. It's the answer. It's the answer to how you solve this insane equation. It's, everything can turn out. I never thought God would be able to pull the rabbit out of the hat of how the Bible is, but I think it's there, and I'm so grateful to you, because I don't feel like anybody could lead me through it like you have. So I love having you talk from your wealth of knowledge about this stuff. So thank you for joining.
Well, it's great being part of this, and I always get so much out of it. It's really deepened my understanding, so it's fun to be part of this.
If any of you at home got anything out of this, remember the Swedenborg Foundation, which not only makes videos like this, but translates Swedenborg's works and does scholarship. We are a not-for-profit. There's a link in the description. You can make a donation and support content like this. Thanks everyone for watching. Jonathan, hope you have a great day.
You too, Curtis. Thank you.